Good evening. All right, we are ready to get going and continue working our way through the Old Testament, doing an overview that gets bogged down in certain areas where basically it's where I find it really interesting in certain spots and certain places that I think the narrative should maybe slow down for just a little bit and make sure we're seeing what is there. So it has been a few weeks since we've been going through this, so we're following our timeline from the very beginning. At what point? In the beginning, God created, right? And so in the beginning, we have creation. What happens in Genesis 3? Okay, Genesis 3, sin takes place, the fall, and then you have the prologue, which the prologue of Genesis 1 through what? All right, 1 through 11 kind of serves as the prologue really to the whole Bible, where it introduces the problems, some of the main characters, especially God, man, and sin, the issue, the problem that needs to be overcome. And then we enter into the story in Genesis 12 with what person? All right, with Abraham. Abraham's the one who is chosen, and now the story is going to flow from Abraham. So, what are the promises that were given to Abraham? All right, that they would have nation. The nation would be given a land. And then through that nation, in that land, all the world would be blessed through the seed. So the nation, land, seed, and then the rest of Genesis really follows the story of those early patriarchs. You get into the Exodus account where they are in what country now? I'm hearing a very lack of little voices right now that I'm used to hearing. Are you guys awake back there? No? Yeah? Yeah. I don't know. I need to be hearing from you guys here. All right? So you have the nation. They end up down enslaved in what nation? All right, in Egypt. Yes, very good. So they become enslaved to the Egyptians. And who brings them out? Or God uses whom to bring them out? Moses. All right, God uses Moses to bring them out. And then in Exodus chapter 24, what happens? All right, they enter into the covenant. Remember, that's where they sprinkled the blood on... All right, they sprinkled the blood on the people. They sprinkled the blood on the altar. Then the reins get turned over to Joshua. In the time of Joshua, they conquer the land in a very limited sense. What do they really do? All right, they defeat the armies, but they don't conquer the land fully. They divide up the land, and then they're told in Judges to do what? All right, go in and drive out the inhabitants of the land. How does that go? Not well. In fact, if you had one word to kind of characterize the time frame of the Judges, what would that be? All right, failure. They failed to drive out the inhabitants. We talked about this morning the Judges cycle, and you get to the end of the time frame of the Judges. How does Judges end? All right, in those days, there was no king in Israel, and... All right, very good. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Judges 21:25. That's how Judges ends, and it's setting up the next book, which in the Hebrew Bible, what's the next book? Samuel. So it's setting up Samuel, where they're going to finally what? They'll have a king. So all of this is then setting up, bringing us into Samuel. If you remember, we made a list here of important places that are found in those two ending narratives, those two ending stories. The hill country of Ephraim, Bethlehem, Gibeah, Jebus, which is going to be Jerusalem, and Jabesh Gilead. All of these are in those last two stories, and all of these become important moving forward. Hill country of Ephraim, how is that one important in Samuel?
Very badly.
Say that again, Joshua.
It is very goodly.
What did you say at first?
Very badly.
Okay, yeah, that is excellent, Joshua. You're exactly right that you are inclined at the end of Judges when you hear this right here. It makes you think this story is going to end very badly, because that's what happens. But then you turn the page into Samuel, and does it end badly?
Where Samuel comes from.
All right, this is Samuel's origin story. The hill country of Ephraim is where Samuel is from. What about Bethlehem? Do we know anyone from Bethlehem? All right, David, right? That took a lot longer than it was supposed to. Y'all who are older, you're allowed to say something, just so you know. You don't have to sit there with smiles on your faces. You can actually say something out loud. It's okay. It's not just the younger people are allowed to talk, right? Yeah. But do we know that yet? We haven't made it that far yet, right? In Samuel? So, what about Gibeah? Who's from Gibeah? Yeah, this is where Saul is from. We haven't gotten to the importance of Jebus yet, but we know Jerusalem's going to be important. And what about Jabesh Gilead? We have talked about them. How do they fit in the Samuel story? Yeah.
They were the ones that had to give up their women to the Benjamites.
All right. So at the end of Judges, remember when there was a civil war basically that was taking place, they almost wiped out the tribe of Benjamin, and they said, where are we going to get women to help really repopulate Benjamin more quickly? Jabesh Gilead was one of the places that they went to do that. Now, move forward into Samuel. Does this show up again? In what part of the story? Yeah, Saul's demonstration, which is out of order because he's declared king. He has his coronation before his demonstration. But this was the place that who was attacking? All right, the Ammonites, Nahash and the Ammonites were attacking Jabesh Gilead. And Saul got all the people of Israel together, and they came and they whooped up on the Ammonites, and they saved Jabesh Gilead. And this is really Saul's highest moment that he has. And then you have a chapter where Samuel's kind of giving a farewell address of sorts. And then we get into Saul's failures. The first one, he was told to wait before offering a sacrifice. Does he? No, he doesn't. And so he's told that his kingdom is going to be taken away from his family, given to someone else who has a heart like God's. And we talked about that whole battle with the Philistines. It could have been such a great moment for Saul if he hadn't made his rash law that he had made that no one's allowed to eat or drink until they have finished and they have won the battle, and his own son is the one who did it. And when they inquire of God, should we go in and finish the job? And God's like, I'm not going to be with you because of this thing. All of it comes to backfire against Saul. And you even see his lack of authority in this story when he says, all right, I guess we're going to execute Jonathan. And what happens? Yeah, the people stand up and say, no, we're not. He is the true hero of this battle, and we are going to make sure that that doesn't happen. All right, so now we're going to move into tonight, probably, I would say, at least among us, probably the most well-known of the stories in Saul's story arc and his narrative. And that is 1 Samuel chapter 15. As we get into 1 Samuel chapter 15, it begins with Samuel from God. What he tells Saul that he needs to do what? First Samuel 15, what is it that Saul is told to do? All right, to go out and utterly destroy the Amalekites. Now, here's the question that we need to make sure that we keep in mind. Why? I mean, this seems to be a pretty harsh command, doesn't it? Out of the blue, kind of random. Why? Why is he sending him against Amalek? Okay. All right. So, John was talking about Exodus chapter 17. And where are we in our timeline up here if we go back to Exodus chapter 17? Okay, right before the covenant, right? Are they out of Egypt at this point? Yes, they're out of Egypt. They're through the Red Sea, and they're on their way to what place? All right, they're on their way to Sinai, and the Sinai narrative really begins in chapter 19. We have this time period. It's a time of testing, and God tests his people, and they put the Lord to the test during this time frame. And it's in the midst of this, in Exodus chapter 17, that Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. What's the interesting part of this story? What makes this particular story unique, this battle? Because there's definitely something that does, right? Okay. Hold on. Ryan, up here, somebody said... Was it Jan? Oh, okay. Go ahead.
The holding up of Moses' hands to win the battle.
Yeah. So if you remember, this is the one where when the staff was up in the air, they were winning. If the staff was lowered, they were losing. So Moses sat down on a rock and what? Yeah. Two people came up on, for either arm, and they held the staff up so that they would win this battle. All right. And then if some of you guys have a quick reference, I am drawing a total blank. I think it's towards the end of Deuteronomy that you have a reference to this battle again. Anybody have that quick reference? 29? 25, okay. All right, so in Deuteronomy chapter 25, thank you, Mike. Verse 17, remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you came out of Egypt, how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary, how he cut off your tail, those who were lagging behind, because he did not fear God. Therefore, when the Lord your God has given you rest from your enemies around you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven, and you shall not forget. All right, so what is the interesting little tidbit that we get here about what Amalek did?
They're to wipe him out.
Okay, what were you saying, Sean? Hold on, let Ryan catch up. We'll give Ryan his steps here, going from front to back to back to front.
And intentionally cut off the ones who were straggling at the end.
Yeah, they're attacking the ones who are lagging behind. And if you have what's estimated, it may be 1 million plus people that are traveling, and all of these people, who's going to be lagging behind? The elderly, the ones who have small children, the ones who with disabilities that are weak or whatever the case might be. Yeah, they're not coming out and manning up and just facing the army. They're taking pot shots at the stragglers. It's a very dishonorable way to fight, right? They're purposefully attacking the weak. And God's like, yeah, I don't like that. I protect those people. So he says they are going to be a perpetual enemy, is really the idea, and there will be a time to blot out the memory of Amalek. So all of that sets up 1 Samuel chapter 15. Any questions on any of that or other comments anyone wants to make? Yeah, Ryan up here, Jan.
Thinking about that helps us understand verse 2 and why it's attack and take out everybody, including those that are young and weak and the animals that are behind. When you look at 1 Samuel 15:2.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on then into verse 2, and let's talk about this specific command. Thus says the Lord of hosts. This is 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 2. I've noted what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them on the way when they came up out of Egypt. Verse 3. Now go strike Amalek, and what do you all have right there? Okay. Totally destroy is a phrase that shows up in, I think, the New American Standard, I believe, has that. What is it, King James, New King James? Is that what they have, totally destroy? What do they have? Serena?
Utterly destroy.
Oh, okay. Utterly destroy. All right. So you have totally destroy, utterly destroy. And somebody said just a second ago, I think multiple people did, the ESV. How does the ESV render this? All right. Devote to destruction. In other words, you have a phrase that's not just a word-for-word translational type of a phrase. This is a phrase that crops up in various moments. You see it in portions of Deuteronomy very early on when they're told to do this to the armies that are attempting to stand in Israel's way as they are trying to come into the land, especially in the plains of Moab across the river. Interestingly, if you go back to Judges chapter 21, let's see, Judges chapter 21. Trying to find exactly where this is here. Yeah, in verse 10, so the congregation, 21:10, the congregation sent 12,000 of their bravest men there, commanded them, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, the women, the little ones, this is what you shall do. Every male, every woman who's lain with the male, you shall, what? Devote to destruction, or utterly destroy, completely destroy, right? So you have that phrase there as well. And it crops up in a few different places. Now, what's really interesting is that they went and they did this at Jabesh Gilead, and what happens later? If they went in and totally wiped out, devoted to destruction. Oh, by the way, this is also the phrase from Jericho when they entered into the land. The things that were what's called under the ban, if you've heard that phrase, are the things that were devoted to destruction. So let's talk about Jabesh Gilead, though, because if they devoted Jabesh Gilead to destruction, which means that they are to wipe out everything and everyone, what would you not expect to see later? People. Where? In Jabesh Gilead. And yet, what do we have in Jabesh Gilead just a couple chapters later? People. Does that strike anyone else as odd? Now, we know the story here in 1 Samuel chapter 15, right? Does Saul, for those of you, and I know I'm getting out of order, but I really want to talk about this phrase. Does Saul completely destroy and do what he's told to do with the Amalekites? No, because he does what? All right, he spares the king, right? But what does Samuel then do? Samuel kills the king. So at this point, the Amalekites are what? If he went in and did what God commanded him to do and completely devoted to destruction the Amalekites and only spared the king, but then the king is killed anyway, then what do we know about the Amalekites? They're gone. They're done, right? They are no more. Except you go to 1 Samuel chapter 30. 1 Samuel chapter 30. And we'll talk about this later, or actually I think this one's probably end up being in a sermon at some point. So I don't want to get into the story itself, but I do want to note, when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, who had made a raid against Negeb and Ziklag? Wait, hold on. Say it. What was that? Can't be the Amalekites, because they were utterly destroyed, weren't they? I mean, they had to have been, because that's what happens in 1 Samuel chapter 15, right? And yeah, let's see here. What's that? What's in verse 8? I'm sorry. In what chapter, verse 8? Oh, yes. Yes, yeah, in chapter 15, yes. They were completely and utterly destroyed, right? You shouldn't see any other Amalekites after this, because Samuel apparently took out the very last one of them. Let's see here. Well, that's probably enough to at least give the idea. I was going to bring up another Amalekite that we find. How do we explain that? And by the way, this is a real question. And I remember struggling through this question one time 20 years ago. I don't know when it was, something, when I was in training. And I was like, well, hold on a second here. I was reading there at the end of 1 Samuel. I'm like, why are there Amalekites? They're supposed to be gone. They're not supposed to be there. And I asked the guy I was training with, and he gave an answer that I guess was somewhat satisfactory, but it's not anymore, really. I think he said something like, well, there may be some pockets here or there, or whatever the case might be. But that doesn't fit 1 Samuel 15, does it? So what do we do with this? Have you guys ever thought about this before? The idea that he was told to utterly destroy, and it says, I have utterly destroyed. And by the way, I don't think that means that he didn't. I believe he fully 100% did what he was told to do, except for Agag. And Samuel killed Agag. So why do we still have Amalekites? What do y'all think? Yeah, Ryan?
So this is more a question for you.
Okay.
What leads you to believe that Saul wasn't trying to save face? Maybe he told a little white lie.
Because this fits also what you see in Jabesh Gilead and what you see in the early part of Deuteronomy. When these phrases are used, and they are, this phrase is talked about, what you find is there are still people afterwards. Samuel doesn't say, no, you didn't, in regards to the people. He does the animals, and he does the king. But he never says, the people you didn't follow through on. Yeah, Kathy? Hold on, let the mic get there. There you go.
I always thought the time difference was very short between Samuel coming and killing King Agag, but how long was that? Do you know? Was it a very short period of time?
When he kills Agag?
Yeah.
Right here. He says, bring me the king.
Right, but I mean,
And he slaughters him on the spot.
wasn't it just a very short period of time between when Saul attacked and killed the Amalekites and
Yeah, Saul is on his way back from battle.
could Agag have had other children or other wives somewhere that maybe weren't there? I don't know.
But they would be Amalekites.
Well, that's true, but if they weren't in that area, maybe, I'm just guessing. I have no
Yeah.
idea. But
No, it's a good thought. Yeah, Jeff? Wait for the mic. It's coming.
I guess I'm confused because when you look in verse 9, and it reads, at least in the New American Standard, but Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were not willing to destroy them utterly, but everything despised and worthless, that they utterly destroyed.
Yeah, but that's in reference to the animals. He's not talking about the people that, they were like, well, this person's bad, so we'll kill them, but we're going to spare the good people. The people were utterly destroyed, except for the king. And the animals were utterly destroyed, except for the good ones. That's the picture that's given. The people were utterly destroyed, except for the king. The animals were utterly destroyed, except for the good ones. Anybody else have any thoughts? Yeah, Becky, back there, wait, Mike's coming. The Mike is coming, not Mike is coming. He's remaining stationary where he is.
Okay, so all the people were utterly destroyed except the king.
Mm-hmm.
Would they have counted slaves and servants as people, or would they have been considered all that was good that was spared, or included in all that was good that was spared?
If they were an Amalekite, they would have been killed. And in fact, you look at what takes place, he makes sure that it's only Amalekites that are there. He forewarns the Kenites that are in the area, get out of Dodge, because something's about to go down, in this narrative. So I wouldn't say that the people who are spared, who become the ones who are thorn in David's side later, were people who were slave status or something. I don't think that's a way around this, type of a thing.
Amalekites living abroad, like when the Israelites were in Egypt, or like Ruth and Naomi when their family was in Egypt. Like, they were Israelites but living in Moab. So if somebody had gone and killed Israelites then, they would have been in Moab and would likely not have been rooted out from another country and killed.
Yeah, and that is kind of the answer that was given to me, is, that, well, these were Amalekites that were in other areas or something like that. But I don't know if that's a fair assessment. And by the way, I'm just saying what I think. Y'all can, whatever, when we get to the end of the discussion, you can chew on it, and if you don't like the taste, you can spit it out. That's all right. But I think there's a simpler explanation. John, go ahead.
Is it possible that this is the same Saul that later on we find very delusional against David, and that he was willing to even take a spear and throw it at his own son? He thought he saw these things. He thought everything was accomplished. Maybe in his own mind he thought it was true, but maybe he wasn't clear-headed.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to what Ryan was saying a second ago. Is he trying to save face, or maybe does he truly believe when he didn't? I would say the same thing. Samuel does not come against and say, well, no, you didn't. The people still live. You may think you did, but you didn't. He only mentions Agag, and he only mentions the animals. Or maybe there's...
That would be the end.
And that goes to what Ryan was saying. But again, Samuel doesn't call him out on the lie, except for Agag and the animals. Okay, hold that thought for just a second. That's a good thought. Go ahead, Kelly.
Are these stories not chronological?
No, they definitely chronological, because when David comes up against the Amalekites, spoiler alert, I'm sorry for those of you, who maybe haven't read through 1 Samuel. When that happens, he had just left the battle in which Saul dies. And so, very, very clearly, chronologically, these Amalekites are alive. I want to go back. Julia, what did you say a second ago? And we'll hold on. We'll let the mic get up here.
The verses that you read earlier, verses 8 and 9 in chapter 15, are not Saul himself speaking. That's the narrator explaining the story. So the narrator is the one who says that Saul utterly destroyed all the people.
Yes. All right. And that's an excellent point to make. And by the way, that is huge in narrative, because the narrator in a narrative is all-knowing. The narrator is not fooled. The narrator is the one who knows everything, is omniscient in the story. And it is the narrator who declares, that he devoted to destruction all the people with the edge of the sword, but spared Agag. So, thank you, Julia, because that is a really important point, is that the all-knowing narrator is the one who does declare this. Anybody else want to give any thoughts before I give mine? Go ahead, Jeff.
Can you repeat what verse that was again that Julia was...
In chapter 15 and verse 8, well, let's start verse 7. Saul defeated the Amalekites from Haphala as far as Shur, east of Egypt, which means that it wasn't just in one place. He did a wide sweep, right? He took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive. He devoted to destruction all the people with the edge of the sword. But he spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the oxen, the fattened calves, the lambs, all that was good, and he would not utterly destroy them. But all that was despised and worthless, they devoted to destruction. So that is verses 7 through 9, and that is the narrator actually giving the account of the story. Yeah, Kelly? Boy, when Ryan volunteered for this night, he didn't realize just how much walking.
destruction, we think everybody, total, that's it. That's what we think. I don't know if that's what that means. That kind of warfare is really, really hard to do, even when you're righteous. The Romans decimated people to prove an example. They would kill every 10th person among the civilian population. And they were considered barbaric. I don't know if this devoted to destruction that we're talking about with the edge of the sword means everybody died. Because if everybody died, there wouldn't be any Amalekites left. So there's something in this phrase that you keep bringing up that maybe doesn't mean what we think it means.
Yeah. Now it says, do not spare them. Kill both man, woman, child, infant, ox, sheep, camel, donkey, right? But I think Kelly's absolutely right. The problem stems from the fact that we are reading ancient text that's in a different language, in a different time, in a different culture, in a different part of the world. I mean, everything about their culture, who and what they are, is different. And yet, we read that with what lens?
Our American lens.
Our Western society, American, modern. I mean, we're kind of in postmodernism, but we still are very much Enlightenment, modern type of thinkers. Scientific exactitude. If you see the word all, what does it mean? 100%. If every shows up, is there an exception? No way, there can't be. Because our American 21st century scientific exactitude comes into play. Not everybody in the world in all time thinks that way or has thought that way. We are reading words and phrases that to them would have had a certain connotation, they would have understood it a certain way, and the words would have come out on the page in a certain way that they would have understood to mean a certain thing. And yet, something gets lost in translation, right? Everybody understand? What if there was a game, and I'm just coming up with an example here. Well, what if there was a game that was about to take place, football game, and someone yelled, "Stomp him in the ground"? What does that mean? That means they're supposed to go out and each of them grab a player from the other team, put him on the ground, and stomp him, right? Right? No, that's the words that were used. Stomp them in the ground, right? Is it possible that the words carried a connotation that may be different from the literal understanding of the words, stomp them in the ground? Is that possible? Does that happen? Do we do that kind of thing? And this is a phrase that comes up over and over again in various parts of the Old Testament text. It's a specific phrase that I think carries a connotation that is not, hey guys, go out and commit genocide. What it is saying, I want you guys to be thorough in your victory. Be thorough. Completely win. When you get on that battlefield, then leave nothing on that battlefield. I got some hands here. Ryan, you were first, and then Jeff.
So, am I understanding you to say that this might be or maybe is hyperbolic and not a direct statement?
I think it's 100% hyperbolic.
Okay.
In the way that it is being used. Go ahead, Jeff, and then Kelly.
Well, to go back to what you had said a while back, put it in the time in our time frame. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, repeat your first part for the folks at home. They kind of missed what you said at first.
That put it in the time of the context of when it was, not in wording that they would have been familiar with and not our own.
Yes, we need to try our hardest to understand that this was written to a different audience, and they would have 100% understood it and caught it and wouldn't have had an issue with what is. They would have understood it without, and maybe understood in a way that's different from how we would understand this. Kelly, you had your hand up.
Well, when it says don't spare anybody, the aged, the women, the children, infants, it is it's beyond the pale for us here in America to think about having women and children and infants on the battlefield. We would not do that. But in the Battle of Mogadishu, that was going on that day. In our time frame, our army was in a fight like that. So if that's what he was saying, if he was saying whoever's on the battlefield, you kill them, doesn't matter.
Yes, I think so.
But to us, that we don't understand that because of the nice society that we live in. There are parts of the world still where those things are happening right now.
Yes, but I would also say there may be some on the battlefield, but we do know from various narratives that it's not like families went with the soldiers. We know David and the Bathsheba story occurs because what happened? When the army went out to battle, who didn't go? Who? All right. Bathsheba was not out on the battlefield, right? David was supposed to have been, and we'll talk about that when we talk about David and Bathsheba. But it's not to say that families necessarily went out. Now, to Kelly's point, it would not be unheard of for that to happen. There definitely could be, and probably were, families that would have been out there. But I don't want to give the impression that families just always went with the men into battle, if that makes sense.
But if what he's saying is if they're on the battlefield, you kill them.
Yes.
Then that would explain the killing of infants. Mm-hmm. Which sounds.
Yeah, but there's nothing that says
if you're walking into an unprotected town, it's hard for us to wrap our heads around. It's not our culture at all. And I'm just trying to process through what you're saying.
Yeah, but they weren't walking into towns.
No, you're right. But why would he say infants and elderly and women?
Because
they must have been. It's either hyperbole. He's either saying if they're there, you kill them.
Yeah.
Or it was true.
Yeah.
If they're on the battlefield, you kill them.
And I think the thing that fits the most with all of the language, this is hyperbolic language. Now, there could have been, and I'm not going to say that there weren't. But I think what fits across the board more is this is very much hyperbolic type of language that's being used. All right, a lot of hands. Dale?
An example of this term, which we read earlier from Judges 21:11, utterly destroyed, did not include every person. If you finish reading that verse, and this is the thing that you shall do, you shall utterly destroy every male and every woman who has known a man intimately. That doesn't include all the women.
Yeah, but now you're saying, hey, let me read this with my 21st century scientific lens, and I'm going to put these side by side, and if I don't have these matching up, whoop, there we go. Now we've got something different. And I don't think that's fair, because the phrase is utterly destroy or devote to destruction, and you see that phrase crop up so many times that it's going to carry the same connotation every single time. It's a common enough phrase that's used that we're not supposed to delineate and say, well, sometimes yes, but sometimes no. It just is what it is.
I guess my point is that the term doesn't necessarily mean to them that it includes every single individual.
I think it does. And just because some people it's specified in one place and not in another, our scientific exactitude would say, oh, well, we got to keep a difference. But if I'm going to allow that another culture can see it differently, I don't see a reason why we would have to assume that it means something different in different places. It is. It's just strictly just an exaggerated type of statement that says, wipe them out on the battlefield to the nth degree, whatever the case might be. Leave nothing alive, even if it means women and children. I mean, that's, it's a very strong type of a statement. And I don't think we're supposed to look at one instance and another instance and say, well, this one doesn't specify these things, so that's different. Well, I think it's the same across the board.
Well, we may be saying the same thing. I don't have the words, I guess. The term utterly destroyed, well, yeah, I'm going to have to think about it.
Yeah.
Some more.
John up here also had his hand up a second ago.
As I open up the mind to the possibility of what we're saying here, that there's this
Exaggerated statement. Yeah.
Exaggerated statement. Then I'd have to take it to the narrative's statements applied to God and his expectations through Samuel to Saul. In the first place, it has to be to him too, because as Saul understood it, God didn't mean to destroy everything, all the babies and everything else, but God meant something else. And so as I look at it today in my modern word, then I'm realizing, well, as I read the scripture from this text and all the translations I have, God's not saying what I'm thinking he's saying, is what it ends up being. God's expectations of him was different than what I'm reading. They would have understood it different. Saul understood it different. So he came back free. He was okay, except for the one thing: there was bleeding of sheep, and there was a king. Mm-hmm. So why wasn't that a hyperbole? And why was the killing of all the sheep the thing that doomed him? When it was just an exaggeration of a statement, kill everything, because they brought it back to sacrifice to God. Mm-hmm. Samuel specifically then addressed that and addressed the king. And besides, Samuel killed the king immediately. If that commandment was a hyperbole, and we really don't understand and see it, how can I separate something that is actual statement that I can understand and what was the exaggeration I can't understand because I'm living today and not understanding it through the text that I'm reading?
Don't mistake hyperbole for something that's not true. I mean, that's not the issue. If we tell someone stomp them in the ground, we mean win the game. I mean, absolutely do this. And utterly destroy means go out on the battlefield and completely destroy what's there. I mean, the animals on the battlefield that they brought with them, destroy them all. What he's not saying is go throughout all the land of Amalek and find every Amalekite that's alive and kill them all and destroy their animals. That's the point I'm trying to get across here. This is very much specific to the battle at hand, not genocide over all the Amalekites in particular. This is very much about go and wage a battle against Amalek and completely destroy what comes out to fight you. And completely. And the exaggerated statement, which, if there are women and children there, then women and children probably are killed. I mean, I'm not saying that that's not the case. But what he's not saying is go through the land of Amalek and find every single person alive and kill them. This is, I think, strictly to a phrase that's used about the field of battle. Kelly, you had a hand up?
Yeah, the king of Amalek was their military leader.
Yeah. He should have been.
He was brought back as a trophy.
Yes.
He was a point of pride for Saul. Kings did that back then.
Yeah.
They would bring the other kings captive and cut their thumbs off and
Bring the people at home up to speed. The mic wasn't there when you first started.
Oh, the king should have been killed. He was the leader of the military. Bringing him back was nothing to honor God. That was a point of pride for Saul, because that's what kings did back then. They'd make other kings their servants and their slaves and cut off their thumbs and put them underneath their tables and so.
Yep. Yeah, and that's exactly right. And he would have been on the battlefield, obviously, because he was a trophy from the battle. And he should have been a part, not just a part of this, but he's kind of the first person you want to make sure is part of the utterly destroyed. But, as Kelly said, this is a pride issue for Saul. Yeah. Was there a hand over here a few minutes ago? Because I know there was like a few hands that popped up, and I thought one might have been over here. Nope. All right. Who else have any thoughts on this? Now, by my saying this, are you hearing me say that I want to change what the Bible says? Okay.
But you still raise the question on mind, how do we know what we're looking at if we're looking through our Western mind? We know what we're looking at.
Yeah, and that.
Even with Kelly's lesson, how do we know that it's a proper thing not to bring a king down?
Okay, hold on, John. I want to repeat what you said because that was fantastic. How do we know that what we're reading? Oh, I'm not going to get it right. How do we know what we're reading is reading through our Western mind? Is that the way you put that?
Because we fooled ourselves all these generations. How do we know how to get back there and understand what I'm saying? How do we get back there and understand what it's saying? Does he mean all the sheep, all the people, or maybe we've been living in a fallacy world?
All right. Now, let me address that first of all. Ultimately speaking, what changes? Besides the fact that we have a pretty good answer why the Amalekites are still there later. But what else changes? Not a whole lot, right? I mean, we're going to come kind of towards the same end. Whether you believe that this is a very exactitude type of a statement, they're supposed to go and wipe out every Amalekite that there is, or you understand this as a reference, kind of an exaggerated, hyperbolic statement, to go and, stomp them in the ground on the battlefield, or whip up on them, or whatever the case, might be. We're not dealing with something that's going to shake faith at this point. Or something where we're like, have we been really messing up for generations upon generations? I don't think that is an end result of this. But we do, I believe, have to constantly be asking the question, am I reading this like a 21st century American, Or am I trying my hardest to see this as someone from a different culture, different history, different perspective? And that's what John really brings up. How do we know? Well, we have to constantly be working at it, looking at it, asking the right questions, trying to figure things out. Asking why is it that there are still people in Jabesh Gilead later? Why are there still people in Ammon and Moab after Deuteronomy? And the way that this phrase is used. Why do we still have Amalekites later? Is there maybe a mistake going on in the way we understand the phrase, as opposed to a mistake that they didn't do what they were fully supposed to do? And if I was going to guess that there's an error going on somewhere, 100% of the time, I will assume the error's with me. That I just don't understand something properly here. Something's messed up. It's got to be with me first. How do I reconcile it? How do I figure this out? What are the questions to ask? How do I get to a place where this can make sense? And when you start asking those questions and going down that path, I think you'll actually begin to find some of these types of answers. So, does that make sense? We're like on the end of our time here, and I feel like there's probably a lot more people that are a little confused than who feel comfortable with the answers. How many people just are really confused with what I'm trying to accomplish here? It's okay for you to raise your hand. I'll just know who not to talk to later if you come up wanting to ask a question. Yeah. Do you have a comment, or are you saying, okay, yeah.
What we're talking about, I think, is supported, what you're talking about, the fact that they conquered the land of Canaan and took it over. The people who were still living there that they had to kick out.
Mm-hmm.
They conquered it. They won the battles, but they still had people there. It's that similar concept that we were just talking about.
It's a very similar concept, where at the end of Joshua, you have the sense that the conquering of Canaan is done. Sounds like it's finished. They did what they were supposed to do. They've conquered the land. They've divided it up. It's theirs. And then you flip into Judges, and you're like, well, what's going on? Didn't we just do this? Didn't we just win? Why are they getting defeated by peoples of the lands they just conquered? And I think it's very much that same type of an idea, that certain language carries certain connotation, and it does for them, and it's harder for us to sometimes figure out exactly what they mean by it and to parse through all of that. All right, good discussion. We're going to have to close it up right there. We are actually a minute over time. So if you have some more questions on that, let me know. And I think we pretty much covered all of chapter 15, right? Yeah. That was a hyperbolic statement. Actually, it wasn't. That was sarcastic type. No, we'll actually get into the narrative hopefully next week. But I will say this. If we need to come back to this, we can. All right? Because I know this is kind of new-ish. It's still kind of new-ish to me. All right? So I'm still processing, working through this. But I think it does make the most sense for the phrase and what's going on. All right. Thanks a lot, guys.